Welcome to the St. John Genealogy Project webcast. Today we will be exploring some lesser-known aspects of the St. John family, uncovering their fascinating stories and ancestral connections. Okay, good morning. It looks like I'm here by myself for now. That may change, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go ahead and proceed for those who are going to watch later. Excuse me. So on my screen, what I'm showing you is the haplogroup RCTS649, which is the haplogroup or terminal SNP for the St. John's of Highlight. So what we have here, what it's showing us is this is the parent, but this parent is several thousand years old. Excuse me. And so I think these dates here that they have are derived from the creation of these two children haplogroups. But because our testers know their exact lineages and FTDNA does not, they have to guesstimate, I guess, where they think these things fall. But what we know is that this haplogroup is Captain Samuel's son Job's line, and this is Captain Samuel's son Samuel. And I'm going to have my cousin Wesley test Big Y, and that way he and my brother under Ebenezer, Samuel's son Ebenezer, may possibly also form a third haplogroup or a child haplogroup under Samuel. So I'm going to test to see if that actually happens, because what I think that might be telling us is pretty significant. So this one yet unnamed lineage, this belongs to two test subjects who descend from Mathew St's son Matthew. Now, the thing about this is if Captain Samuel and Matthew were truly brothers, we should not see these three SMPs necessarily as parallel branches. At some point, there should be an intermediary between CTS 649 and these three sibling lines. So what that kind of tells me is that the ancestor could be further back, because we're starting, so like these two were formed in the 1700s. And my understanding is you would need, a good 150 or more years to start to see these brother branches forming. Which means that these three groups probably do not share the same paternal line. They could, not quite sure. So I also don't know how they're going to place this new SMP. So I still have to wait. I'm just impatient because I've been waiting forever for this result. But anyway, so if it forms a parallel one, I'm thinking that we're going to go back into the 1500s, just like the tip calculator is suggesting. And the tip calculator is just a generic estimation. I realize that, but everything, including the mutation at DYS 439, where all the descendants of Matthias 2 and Matthias 3, except for the Samuel group, have a 12, and all of the descendants of Samuel have an 11. If this was a new mutation or random, you would not see it falling exactly the same for all descendants. It would be a hit and miss here and there. But if it's an older mutation, it means that all of the descendants, either after Matthias 2, mutated into two separate groups, or it goes back further, and the mutation occurred back, around 1560. So anyway, that's where we're at right now with our haplogroup. So these two represent Samuel's two different sons. If my cousin form the third one, then there'll be 3 for Samuel here. But these would all be these two are definitely after Samuel, and Samuel died in 1752. His son Samuel was born in 1705, so that does fit this right here. It'll be interesting to see what happens here, because the Mathew branch, Matthew would have been born in 1686, and Samuel was born in 1680 or as early as 1672, depending on which theory you follow. So if this truly belongs to Matthew and it forms its own haplogroup, this might get pushed back, is what I'm thinking. Because then what should happen is this one should have formed in 1686, and this one should have formed between 1672 and 1680. So I could see this being pushed back to 1680, 1670, whatever. Or even further back, if these are two truly different branches, it may update to push that back to 1560. In which case, that will, tell us which theory is correct. So it may not result in anything that we can use, but I'm hopeful that because it formed a third SNP, that's telling us something significant. But anyway, that's where we're at on that. So a few months ago, I published this article on the website. I did some research on the history of Ridgefield, Connecticut, and I shared this article, but I haven't really gone over it, and so I thought I would do that today. So I had to update it because of the Mathew St issue with Tipperary and Wexford. So I removed all of the Tipperary stuff from this, and it's only about the history of Ridgefield, which still proves that Samuel could not possibly be the son of Matthias St, which goes back to this point here. Samuel was the son of Matthias, 1635 to 1711, and Matthew was the son of Matthias St. These are, in my opinion, two distinct branches that the documentary evidence supports. So I'm going to walk through that right now. So if we go through this article, it's a little long because I wrote it for a class. So what I did was I broke out, and what I was going to say was, it says that it's still major corrections. The corrections are because some of the images that uploaded got distorted, and I have to replace them because they're kind of blurry and messed up a bit. So I just haven't had time to go back and replace the images, so that's the only thing outstanding on this article. So anyway, I put there's 3 different hypotheses for the origin of Samuel. So we have the original hypothesis, which is what Orlean published in her 1907 book, and it places Samuel as the son of Matthias St. Well, I absolutely know for sure that he is not the son of Matthias St, and that will become evident as we go through the history of Ridgefield. But there's a second hypothesis, and that was Churchyard's hypothesis that moved Samuel back to the son of Matthias II. And this is based on the idea that Matthias II lived to 1728, because that's what Orlean said. There is no burial record for Matthias II that I have seen. There is no primary record for when Matthias II died, and Orlean did not cite this statement. So none of us have any clue where it came from, and it seems improbable that he lived to 100, although it's not impossible. We do know that Cook St. John, I think, lived to 101 or 104, something like that. So it's not impossible, but there just doesn't seem to be any documentary evidence to support it, and the evidence seems to contradict it, really. So anyway, that's hypothesis 2. And then hypothesis 3 is my hypothesis. Where is it? Did I lose my... Okay, I guess I didn't create a box for mine. Or that's what I have to replace. Okay, so my hypothesis is that there are 2 immigrants, Matthias and Matthew, and the documentary evidence supports that. Maybe it's after this. Okay. So, and then there's actually a 4th hypothesis. There's the Dutch hypothesis, which claims that Matthias was the son of Christopher, and Christopher was the son of a man named Matthias or Matthew Sankins, and that he had a brother named Thomas, who was a Dutch man born in Antwerp, and that is the Sankin hypothesis. The reason it is not being treated in this article as an official hypothesis is because the author revealed that he was using his DNA for this article, and he revealed that he is not a St. John. He is actually a Narramore. Now, the register where this article was published has not issued a retraction, and I think that's very disappointing, because it implies, if you follow him and what he's published about his origin, it implies that all Matthias descendants are Narramores, and that is absolutely incorrect. He left our project because he did not match St. John's, because he found out he matched Narramores. That's why he gave the project to me in 2014, and why I have been taking it on ever since. So I treat this as a documentary issue later on in the article, but for the main purpose of this is to show why we have 2 immigrant lines, and why I am almost certain this right here is going to prove that we do not have a common shared ancestor within 150 years between these 2 lines, or more. We have 3 people in the chat, or see if I can say anything or specifically for you. So if you would introduce yourselves, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm going to keep talking. Okay. So the evidence for 2 immigrants is this right here. This is the estate of lands and accommodations for 1655 in Norwalk. And as you can see, you have Mathias St. John Sr., who had 189 pounds worth of land. Then you have his son, Matthias Jr., with 150. And we know that Matthew had something, but it was obliterated. But the point is that these were real separate land values. This is not something that you get merged. It's not something somebody makes up. These are different values. And unfortunately, we don't know what this list here is where it was obliterated. But we do know that there were values there, and the sum of all of this came to 5,475. So what that tells us is this is not a made-up number, it's not a made-up entry, and it doesn't mean Mark, it means Matthew. There were 3 men who helped form Norwalk: Matthias Sr., his son Matthias Jr., and Matthew. And they all had their own land with their own land value. And that's one of the images I have to replace. Then, the next year, in 1656, so Orlean tried to say that if you saw Matthias, Matthew, that they meant Mark. That was her claim, that they meant Mark here. They didn't mean Matthew. Somebody just, messed up and put Mark or Matthew instead of Mark. That's in 1655. But remember, Mark is a couple years younger than Matthias Jr. So let me get my calculator out. 1655. I could probably do this in my head, but I'm not gonna. Minus 1628. So Matthias Jr. would have been 27. And what was the year? 1633? Mark would have been 22 in 1655. But here on the 1656 list, this is the native inhabitants that are in town meetings. We have Mathew Sr., Mathew Jr., and Mark. Now this is where people say this is Matthias Sr. and Matthias Jr., and they just replaced it with Matthew. I disagree. I think this is Mathew Sr., and I think this is Mathew Jr., and I think Matthias is in London, or on his ship, or wherever. I don't think he was in Norwalk at this time. I think these two men, Matthias and Matthew, alternated back and forth between Norwalk and London, or wherever they had shipping business. Because Matthias was a baker, and his brother James was a baker. James stayed in London. Matthias went to Norwalk. I think they had a bread trade back and forth between the colonies. And Matthew was a shoemaker, and he probably did the same thing. He probably, with John Gregory, had some kind of arrangement going with shoes. So then you go down here to... Oh, that was what was missing. So what's missing is this one right here, where in 1656, Mark was listed with his own home lot. I think that one's it. No, that's the same thing as that one. I'm missing the... Sorry, I haven't read this in a while. I think it's this one. Okay, so in 1656, we had additional settlers, and that's where Mark got listed. Does that make sense to everybody? Let's see. Okay, so if Matthew back here meant Mark in 1655, then why was Mark on a list of additional settlers in 1656? It doesn't make any sense. So Matthew and Matthias have to be two different people. That is the Norwalk proof. When you go into London, there's all kinds of evidence that these are two different men. So we can also look at the lots in Norwalk. So let me see. There was a map. So this was the map that Edwin Hall created. And here, way up here, is where Matthias lived. Matthias the Senior. And then when he first came to Norwalk, he lived right here at Lot 3, which is now owned by Mark in this map. So what happened is in 1661, Matthias gave this lot to Matthias Jr., and he went up here to Lot 22. Then Matthias Jr. bought Isaac Moore's lot, and so he left Lot 3, let's see where I'm at. I'm backwards, hang on. Matthias had home Lot 3, he gave it to Matthias 2. Then around 1670 he was in Lot 17 that he bought from Richard Olmsted, so that's right there. And then we follow Matthew. Matthew had home Lot 25, which was right here. And on my Google Earth one, it is right here. And that was so originally Matthias and Matthew were neighbors. But then Matthias moved up here. Matthew stayed here. This lot went to Matthias Jr., and then it went to Mark. And when in 1690, that's who was living there, was Mark. So then, follow Mark. Mark originally bought a lot from Joseph Fitch. So in 1655 or 1656, when he shows up on that additional settlers list, it's because he bought a lot from Joseph Fitch. Until then, he was living with his father, most likely. So he probably got married. I don't know if we know the dates when he got married. But he then bought this lot here. And that's when he showed up on the additional settlers list. So in 1661, father sells that lot to Matthias. Mark is still living there, and then Mark in 1660 bought Isaac Moore's lot. And then I don't know what happened to him. Oh, he went over here. He ended up in lot 3. So Mark went from his own lot 5 to lot 16 to lot 3 that his father originally held. Matthias too went from lot 18 to lot 3 to lot 17. Matthias went from lot 3 to lot 22. At no time does it intersect this Mathew line. But what we do know is that in 1690 or 1670 to 1690, Matthias was listed as holding this lot when Mark was listed as holding this lot. Now remember, this Matthias Jr. is at lot 17. So we have these let me see where it is. We're going to go up. Sorry, like I said, it's been a while since I read this. So this is talking about these lots, and that between 1670 and 1690, following the deaths of both immigrants, because Matthias died in 1669 and Mathew died in 1665, the deeds show that there was a settler on lot 25 named Matthias. But that is not Matthias II. It is Matthias that was born in 1635, the son of Mathew. His baptism record is in London. So we know that these men existed. So that's the point of this chart, is to show you that these men were different. And they were on different lots, and those different lots had different monetary values. So then I got into the Ridgefield records, and what I found was that Matthias III was already in Ridgefield by 1709. So that means that Matthias III cannot be the Matthias that deeded land to his son Samuel in April of 1710, because it said he was of Norwalk. So Ridgefield had a specific rule that you could not live in Ridgefield and own land elsewhere. This was apparently something was going on with that. I guess they didn't want people maybe influencing politics or decisions based on where else they held land. They wanted the settlers to be truly invested in this area, I guess. But for whatever reason, they did not want this outside influence. And so if you owned land in Ridgefield, you could not live elsewhere. So that means that Matthias III, Samuel, and Mathew all lived in Ridgefield by 1709. And we know that because Mathew got married in Ridgefield as one of the first weddings that happened in October of 1709. And by this time, they were already having their town meetings also in Ridgefield. So when Samuel of Ridgefield was deeded land, his father's land, in 1710, it means his father could not be, or Matthias III could not be his father, because the man that deeded land to Samuel was from Norwalk. Then we have the inheritance of this land that Samuel got from his father, Matthias, 1635. So, let's see. I'm trying to find the right image. Okay. So Samuel had lot 1 in Ridgefield. And when George, Rockwell, wrote his history of Ridgefield, he misplaced where lot 1 was because he went by the 1608 plan for the burying ground. And the burying ground ended up being way down here. It was originally said to be behind lot 1. Well, lot 1 is right here, and then this was land designated for the burying ground. However, when they finally started building, these lots over here were too wet, so they had to make adjustments and move them over And when they moved those over, it pushed the burying ground down here. And that created a problem. And actually, lot 1 is right here. So this is the first burying ground home lot that was transformed into the land that was set aside in 1708 for the burying ground. Well, this lot right here is this yellow piece right here. North of it directly is what was Samuel's lot 1. And this piece right here is what Samuel inherited when his father died in 1711. And so what happened here was the rules of Ridgefield said that you had 4 years to develop your home lot of 2.5 acres, and then they had another 5 acres on the rear for farming or whatever, homesteading. So you had 4 years to develop your land. If you did not develop it within 4 years, you forfeited the undeveloped portion, and the town of Ridgefield could redistribute it as they pleased. Now, excuse me, Samuel moved to Ridgefield in 1708, and he was given lot 1. His father, after he deeded him land and his brother's land in Norwalk, he came to Ridgefield in 1710. What appears to happen is, if you go back all the way to the origins of Ridgefield, Samuel was not the only St. John with Matthias and Matthew. There was another St. John named Ebenezer that was supposed to come to Ridgefield. So he invested money in the development of Ridgefield, but then he never came and received a lot in 1708. What appears to have happened is that his father, Mathias 1635, swapped home lots with him. So Ebenezer received Matthias's home lot in 1710 in Norwalk, and Matthias came to Ridgefield and took over what was his home lot. So they ended up giving him a home lot right south of lot 1 in land that was originally the burying ground. And from here, we have this strip of land, because when Matthias died a year later in 1711, he had not developed all this part that's yellow. So Samuel could only inherit what was truly his father's, what was vested to him, and that was what he developed within that year time period, because of the 4-year use it or lose it clause. So when Matthias died in 1711, this piece of property went to Samuel. And now Samuel had 2.5 acres plus a 0.31 acre strip of land. And this, the town repurposed to Joseph Whitney. And so what happened was, Joseph Whitney gave it to his brother Richard, and then Richard Whitney sold it to Richard Osborne. And when Richard Osborne was living here, he decided he wanted to put it back into its full size home lot, so he bought this off of Samuel. And then we can see that transaction. Hang on, looking for the images. So like I said, I still have to update some of this. Okay, so Joseph sold it to his brother Richard, and then Richard sold it to Richard Osborne. And then when Richard Osborne had it, he bought that little strip, and he made this a home lot size again, the full 2.5 acres. And that was how all the land was distributed on Main Street. They were all 2.5 acres of land abutting or fronting Main Street, and then they had 5 acres on the back for farming. So that right there, this land transaction proves that this could not have been Mathias III. Mathias III did not have a home lot in the burying ground. Mathias III did not die in 1711. He died in 1748 in Wilton. Excuse me. And he gave his home lot, which was 6, way north of lot 1, so it would have been way up in this area. He gave that to his son Nathan, because he was still alive in 1717. So there is no way that the man that lived here, who Samuel inherited from, was Mathias III. That one we can rule out. So what happens with this is we have to now go to Churchyard's theory, and that was, excuse me, that Samuel was the son of Matthias too. Now this would make sense if Matthias too truly did live to 1728. That would certainly be a plausible theory. The problem with that one is that if we go down, hang on one second. Let me see. Hang on. Okay. What's the next one? Okay, so on December 20th, 1705, Nathaniel Booton writes to the court asking that his uncle, Mathias St Jr., who would have been Matthias III, be assigned as his guardian. And then on November 6, 1706, Matthias III wrote and signed another document about being Nathaniel's guardian in which he did not refer to himself as senior or junior, suggesting that he was the only adult Matthias in that family at the time, or the senior, the only adult one that would have been had legal, like would have been old enough to make legal action. So this suggests that Matthias too had already been deceased because he was no longer using the junior, and his son Matthias, born in 1695, would have only been 10, 11 years old at the time. So he wouldn't have been, for legal purposes, Matthias Sr. He would have just been Matthias. And when he sold his land, or when he gave his land to Nathan, he did not refer to himself as senior or junior either, because again, Matthias III would have only been about 20 years old at that point, and they would have already moved to Wilton. So the theory is that Matthias II died between December 20th, 1705 and November 5th, 1706. So sometime between 1705 and 1706, Matthias II died. Now, if you go to what Vercas wrote, Vercas said that Matthias died in 1690 or 1699. I can't read the book. It got messed up on that part of it. So it's either a 1669 or a 1690. I'm sorry, 1690 or 1699. So, but at the time, Vercas thought that was Matthias I, and he also said that he was the son of Oliver de Port St. John, and we already know that that's not true. So I don't really trust Vercas, but for some reason, Vercas had this date. I don't know where it came from. Supposedly somebody died in 1690 or 1699. That may have been Matthias too. I don't know. But what does seem plausible is that he died between 1705 and 1706. Now, to go to Vercas's point about 1690, the last known record for Matthias II, other than this implication here as junior, was that the last land transaction occurred in 1687. And that one we know for sure was Matthias II because he's listed with Mark and he's listed with Samuel's widow, Elizabeth Hoyt. There's that. Okay, so moving on down from this, what I want to also say is that we have 2 DNA tests pending for the Y DNA. One is, like I said, the Matthias Mathew line, Matthias III Mathew line, which is this unnamed lineage right here. But we also sent a DNA test to Argentina, and it's this man right here's descendant. So I'm going to show you his pedigree. So Maria descends from this branch right here, and she descends from John's daughter. And so she didn't have a test subject to test. Now they have tested, she and her mother have tested at MyHeritage. I don't use MyHeritage in this project. So I've also bought Maria's mother an Ancestry DNA test. And I bought it when it was on sale this last week. So they're mailing it to me, and I'm going to then mail it to her mother. And that way, because we have a lot of people on Ancestry DNA. And I'm hoping that her mother's DNA test kit will produce some matches so we can figure out where this branch fits. Now, this is from a Longford, Ireland group, and what's interesting is if you look at her ancestor, in my opinion, he looks identical to Job, Captain Samuel's descendants. This is my third great-grandfather. This is, I think, her third great-grandfather, and then this is Daryl's third great-grandfather, I think. So these three men, I mean, the nose alone, I mean, I realize the beard makes them look alike for sure, but it's more about the nose bridge and the eyes for me that makes me think that there is some family resemblance. And what's crazy is I have a picture of my dad, and he looks identical to one of another St. John who is no closer than 10th cousin. And so this means that these facial features have definitely carried forward. But of course, they could be from anything, and they don't predict DNA the way, because you can get your features from all kinds of different ancestors. But anyway, I just think it's interesting that these three men look so much alike. Now, having said that, I think that her line, hang on, let me refresh this page. I think her line descends from Matthias's brother James through the Miller, South Carolina branch, because Miller's father James left his will in Tipperary in 1743, or his widow did in 1750, and she named Miller and another son named John. So we know that this line was definitely in Tipperary, and it appears that Maria's line matches Gordon, Ian, Roy, and Maria all converge here. And that's one of the reasons I bought the DNA test kit for her mother, is to see if she matches them on Ancestry DNA. Because I believe these two, Ian and Roy, both tested at Ancestry DNA. But Maria has matches at MyHeritage that connect to this line too on MyHeritage trees. But I have not seen those trees to verify them, so I'm not relying on that. But if she shows up as a match to Ian and Roy, then we're going to know that those three branches are connected, and most likely they descend from this James Miller line that was back and forth between Tipperary, South Carolina, and Tipperary, Ireland, and Charleston, South Carolina. So that's where we're at with that. So we sent her cousin a Y-DNA test kit for 37 markers. If he matches one of our St. John groups, I'm going to upgrade him to Big Y, because if there's a match to this group, as I suspect there will be, that should form a whole new haplogroup, I'm hoping. And that might drill us back further, because right now, this CTS 649 is several thousand years old. It wasn't, and these branches were created circa 1700. So hopefully we'll get this new information on the Matthias 3 Mathew line and see how it's really sitting with these two. And then hopefully we'll get some more tests upgraded to Big Y so we can start forming more of these child haplogroups and really narrow down where their common ancestor is. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Doesn't look like there's anybody here still. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a good day.